There is a story about priorities that we have for you today. Remember that brothers come before hoes. So, let's get started. It is safe to say that every single person you meet in this life possesses a unique quality that sets them apart from others. Being born with money, athletic prowess, intelligence, or even good looks is what it means to be from a privileged socio-economic background. These specialized abilities empower them to take charge of their lives and provide them with an advantage over their rivals. When it comes to those who are less fortunate, the gifts they give frequently serve as a cautionary warning to others about the difficulties that life can bring. For as long as I can remember, my good friend Ralph has always possessed his own specialties that set him apart from other people. Mayhem and destruction are the results of those. He is the personification of Wreck-It Ralph in the human world. Ralph has probably done it, and he has the scars to prove it. If there is a way to take something sweet and wholesome and turn it into a catastrophic mess, then Ralph has probably done it. He's a human wrecking ball, not in the way that Miley Cyrus is weird, but in the way that I can't believe he's still alive and not locked up is the way to describe him. Inevitably, he became known as Wreck-It Ralph and frequently as the Demolition Man due to the fact that he caused chaos by engaging in activities that went well beyond what was considered socially acceptable. If there is a method that can completely eradicate something, Ralph has discovered it and experimented with it several times. To put it simply, he is a wonderful person to be around, provided that you are on his good side. 3 years after graduating from college, I chose to wed Jenna Phoenix. I had my head so far up my head that I didn't realize her personality, which was completely understandable given that she was incredibly hot and had a great ass. She made up for it in the two most important ways to a superficial person like me. She looked like a porn star and, more importantly, she could perform like one as well. I knew that she wasn't exactly the warm and caring type when I married her, but she made up for it in both of those ways. As long as she makes his dick hard enough to drain the blood away from his brain and prevent him from thinking straight, a man can overlook a resting bitch face and a shitty attitude. This is a scientific fact that has been established. To say that you would be surprised at how frequently that occurs to men would be an understatement. However, we all know that you would not be surprised at all. Until we learn to think with either our heart or our head, we think with our dicks. This is a process that allows us to learn through pain and experience. What makes for a great romantic relationship is the heart, what makes for a great marriage is the head, and what makes for a great fee for your attorney is a hard dick. There was only one time that Jenna and Ralph had ever met during our courtship, and that was when Ralph was at home on leave. She had acquainted herself with a few of my other friends and had a satisfactory relationship with them. The individuals in question were typical members of the human race and, in comparison, not particularly outrageous. I warned her about Ralph, but I knew she didn't really understand what I was trying to say. It was a case of her smiling and laughing at stories of the things he had done, but she did not really understand that the stories were actually true, with only a small amount of embellishment. When you are caught up in the middle of a story, it takes on a completely different meaning than when you are just observing things happening to other people. Stories are hilarious when they are happening to other people. When you have people associating you with a human man-child who is being questioned by the police about why he is unable to put mousetraps all over Chuck E. Cheese while yelling that he is going to kill the giant rat once and for all, or why you are unable to suddenly start working at a checkout counter at Walmart if you do not actually work there, the humor in the situation becomes a great deal less funny. While the majority of his actions were foolish and unharmful, there were a few that went a little bit beyond what was acceptable. Fortunately, our hometown is similar to many others, so he was able to successfully beat the charges on multiple occasions. In a situation where half of your cousins are members of the police force, your uncle is the sheriff, and his wife, who also happens to be Ralph's godmother, is the judge, it is incredible what you are able to get away with. They had cautioned him that his stunts were going too far and that he needed to stop doing them. This was despite the fact that the family connections protecting him were keeping him safe. Auntie Judge informed him that he had two options, either he could join the army or he could spend a year in county, blast fishing in the reservoir while they were trying to restock it for the fishing derby. She told him this during the time that he had finally crossed the line. Considering that it was one of Auntie Judge and Uncle Sheriff's favorite activities to do together on their annual date, she was extremely irritated by this. You are free to mess with other people as much as you like, but you should never mess with Auntie Judge's time with her girlfriend. Thus, Ralph embarked on his journey to serve his country with honor. As a result of Ralph's service in the army, he was absent from town for the majority of the time, which meant that his interactions with me and, consequently, Jenna were limited. I would send him random care packages that were filled with different things depending on where he was in the world. We would communicate with each other through video chat and email. Ralph was able to enlist as an explosive ordnance disposal technician despite the fact that he was an idiot. His family connections allowed him to keep the majority of his activities off of his criminal record, which allowed him to get a job in the military. For the simple reason that you want someone who is likely struggling with mental health to be disarming explosives. Due to the fact that basic training consisted of nothing more than a random assortment of individuals and the drill sergeants were preoccupied with the task of completing their mandatory training activities with the idiots of the platoon, Ralph was able to conceal his nefarious activities throughout the entire training period. Before he was caught messing around on an explosive range by building a C for dildo on the day that the command sergeant major was scheduled to visit the range, he even managed to make it halfway through the advanced individual training program. If he hadn't been boasting about modeling it after himself while his instructors and the command sergeant major stared in awe, he might have even been able to get away with it. It was at this point that Ralph's instructors finally came to the conclusion that Ralph's personality was not a good fit for EOD. However, they believed that they had an idea of where his personality would fit in perfectly, and that was in the field of combat engineering. You see, when it comes to the disposal of bombs, explosives, and demolition, technicians are required to be mature and serious, whereas combat engineers have approximately 80% of the intelligence with approximately 70% of the recklessness thrown in for fun. After Ralph had finished explaining to his AIT instructors what he had done to get kicked out of EOD school, he realized that he had finally found his purpose in the army military. When they told him that he had failed to construct parts of a female anatomy to put a C4 fuse into so that he could brag about destroying it, and when he was instructed to add more explosives to his concrete charges the following day on the range because, as the good sergeant told him, blow all of that shit up because it's a pain in the ass to turn back in, Ralph finally realized that he had found a place to call home. Ralph would send me emails in which he would tell me about the fun he was having, his shenanigans, and the activities that earned him a pair of Article 15s for doing stupid things, but they were not nearly enough to get him kicked out of the army. Despite the fact that he had a wonderful time, he made the decision to return home after his 4 years had passed. I had been busy getting married to my walking wet drain, Jenna, while he was away protecting our freedoms. I was proud of him for his efforts. In the beginning, Jenna and I had a marriage that was fairly typical. Prior to starting a family, we had hoped to have spent some time establishing ourselves in our careers. When you don't have to worry about finding babysitters or hauling around an adequate supply of diapers, traveling the world becomes a lot less stressful. The relationship between Jenna and I was going well, but all of a sudden, it began to deteriorate. She began to behave in a different manner, perhaps not in a significant way at first, but it became noticeable toward the end. This continued for a number of weeks. I attempted to have a conversation with her about the problems that I observed within our marriage. However, she responded by stating that there was nothing wrong and that we were doing fine while she went about her new normal activities. I eventually came home from work one day to find her wedding ring sitting on the kitchen table. That continued until I eventually came home. My attempts to communicate with her resulted in nothing but the standard, typical bullshit, "It isn't you, it's me, I'm going through some stuff," and all of the other excuses to get out of talking to her. After what seemed like an even split, I was finally served in the afternoon when we were having Ralph's welcome home party. The reason given was the standard irreconcilable differences that were listed as the reason. As I was leaving to go to the party, I left the papers on the table so that I could be there to greet my friend when she got home. I was still confused about the reasons behind the dissolution of my marriage. His return meant more to me than I was probably willing to admit to anyone else. I had missed having Ralph around, and his return meant more to me still. It was a mystery to me why my marriage had deteriorated to such a state of disarray. I had a strong suspicion that she was involved in some kind of criminal activity, but I put it out of my mind for the night. When I saw Ralph come in, I immediately gave him a big hug, and his response was immediate, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" I responded by saying, "It's nothing, don't worry about it. We're here to celebrate you coming home." I then handed him a drink. "Glad to have you home, buddy," he said to me with a searchful expression on his face. Afterwards, he smiled and said, "Yeah, right. You are absolutely correct. It is wonderful to be back at home." That evening, we had a few shots. If I say that we drank the bar dry, then I mean that we drank so much that they needed to go to the liquor store that was just around the corner to get more. After we were finally kicked out, Ralph and I made our way to the local fine dining establishment that is open in the middle of the night. The food was completely greasy, had no flavor, and was absolutely perfect. With the noise of the party died down to the quiet of the diner, Ralph asked, "What happened?" "I don't know. Everything was fine, then things got weird, and then she left. I got the divorce papers a few hours before your party. I still don't know what happened." As he always did, he got straight to the point. When Ralph asked, "So, who is she fucking?" I responded, "I don't know." After thinking for about 4 seconds, he then announced, "Okay, so here's the plan, we fuck up her life, and then we find out who he is, and we fuck up his life as well." This was the first time in a while that I actually smiled. Is it that simple? Of course it is, she's gone. You can't go back to the bitch anymore after what she did, so why bother crying about it like a little bitch? Even if she walked back into your life, would you ever trust her again? Fuck no. He wasn't wrong about any of it whatsoever. She was no longer present. The time had come to put an end to the discussion and move on. He smiled in a way that I had seen him do 100 times before, and it was completely ridiculous. I'm on terminal leave for the next month, so I have plenty of time to help with this. You take care of the lawyer, and I'll take care of the rest. I laughed and asked, "What the fuck are you going to do?" "Don't worry about this, bro, I got this." After we finished eating our grease, we called for a ride back to my house, and then we went to try to get some sleep. When I awoke the following morning, it was approximately 11 o'clock in the morning, and I could hear noises coming from the outside, so it seemed as though people were talking in the driveway. As I looked out the window, I noticed that the driveway was stuffed with my belongings that had been inside the house before I went to bed. I also noticed that people were walking up to Ralph while searching through the items in the driveway. During the time that I was asking Ralph what he was doing, I took a sip of my coffee. The hand-drawn sign that announced the cheating bitch sale provided me with a pretty good idea of what he was doing. "What does it look like I'm doing?" "I'm making you some money." Thank you, but how do you know what is Jenna's stuff and which is mine?" "That's easy. If it's female crap, then I'm selling it because it is probably hers. And if it looks classy, I'm also selling it because it probably isn't yours since you clearly have shitty taste, especially in women." I nodded my head in agreement. "You have a point." Stopping him would have been a waste of a moment. At this point, I didn't care about the fact that some of the things were being sold, even though I felt a little guilty about it because some of them were family heirlooms that Jenna had especially cherished. As Ralph handed me some printed papers, "She really is a dumb bitch. She probably should have logged out of her Gmail on your house computer before she left, but thankfully she didn't. She's been fucking some dude named Tim who she works with. They've been fucking for a bit and sharing photos with each other. Really, you should have known better than to marry a chick with a tramp stamp of a butterfly above her ass." I looked over what he'd given me, astonished at how easily he'd found out about her cheating. I uttered the cliched phrase, "I never knew," on my lips. On the other hand, I shrugged my shoulders and bargained with a woman about the cost of Jenna's wedding dress. "No shit, dumbass, because you trusted the bitch. But that's done now, time to move on." I countered her initial suggestion of $500 to $20, and the nice woman was very excited about my attempt to change her mind. It would have been foolish of me to reveal the comment, but I was looking forward to the day when I could tell her that it had been sold for $20 as a nice fuck you. A friend of mine who works as a family practice attorney and sells his soul on a daily basis received a text message from me while the sale was going well. He responded by telling me to come to his office so that he could look over the offer and sign some documents. He was very quick to deliver his message. I arrived back in the middle of the afternoon, and almost everything had been taken away by the time I got there. With the exception of the essentials that a man needs in order to survive, the interior of the house appeared to be almost devoid of any objects. Ralph was just finishing up the process of packing a large box that had the words Jenna Stuff printed on the sides of the box. She smiled at me and asked, "How did it go with the lawyer?" "Fine, no issues. The agreement is fair, so I've signed it. I won't do any better with the courts." "When did your sale end?" "About an hour ago. I had to run out to get some supplies, but I'm done now. This is all that is left of her stuff." He then handed me an envelope and said, "That's her cut of the sale." Her portion of the sale was $214.65. Make sure she gets her half. We should probably drop off her stuff at her parents' house so she doesn't have a reason to come back here. That makes sense. Let's drop off her stuff, then go grab something to eat. Knowing that the price of her wedding dress alone was equivalent to that of a low-priced automobile, I was aware that Ralph had most likely not gotten the best deal possible. However, I was relieved to get it out of the house so that I could begin my new life. I made an attempt to pick up the box, but Ralph grabbed it first and informed me that he already had it. He also suggested that I drive because I was aware of the location where Jenna's parents resided. As soon as we arrived at the residence of Jen's parents, her father Simon answered the door and then allowed us to occupy the space. When we told him that we were here to drop off her belongings, Simon attempted to apologize for her actions. However, I interrupted him by asking, "Did you know that she was cheating on me?" He was unable to look me in the eye and shook his head in agreement. "Thank you for that, Simon. You have raised a wonderful daughter." Ralph placed the box on the table, and I caught myself doing a double take as I caught a glimpse of the contents of the box. I had a good feeling about the fact that the enormous dildo with the correspondingly enormous hairy nuts, as well as the large black dildo porn, were new additions to my home that had not been there before. Also present was a fire extinguisher that was red in color. I did my best to maintain my composure and instead instructed my soon-to-be ex-father-in-law to inform his daughter that I had signed the papers and that my attorney would be speaking with her attorney. I did this because I wanted to avoid laughing. I was barely able to keep it together. The ridiculous size of the dildo had me on the verge of laughing, so I pretended to shake my head in disgust as we walked out of the room, while he was attempting to stutter out an apology. "It's 12 inches long, 6 inches wide, and I don't know how big the hairy balls are. They were a nice touch, though," he said with a shit-eating grin. "How big is that dildo and what else did you put in there?" I couldn't help but burst out laughing as soon as we were back in my truck. "What else did you put in there?" While we were eating dinner, he entertained me with stories about his adventures over the past few years. We had a good time. Even though I had heard some of them from him in previous conversations, hearing them come out of his mouth made it significantly more hilarious than it would have been otherwise. When Ralph is around, it is nearly impossible to be in a disposition that is not positive. The fact that Jenna had made my life so miserable before she left made it much simpler to begin the process of moving on beyond her. Due to the fact that it was more cost-effective to bundle with the internet provider, Jenna and I were among the exceptional individuals who continued to use a home phone. I was able to take pleasure in a scathing message that Jenna had left for me when I checked it after we had returned home. She screamed for approximately 2 minutes straight about her cell phone, huge dildo, hairy balls, father thinks I'm pregnant, and big black dicks. Her ranting and raving were so difficult to understand that it was almost impossible to comprehend what she was saying. I checked my phone, and there were no messages from Jenna. However, as I looked up from my phone to Ralph's smile, I checked it once more, and I discovered that Jenna's contact had been blocked on my cell phone. I looked at Ralph. "You were a busy boy today." I understand most of that rant surprisingly, but not the pregnant part. Ralph grabbed a pair of beers out of the fridge and handed me one, taking a sip of his. "Sorry, the best I could do with that limited amount of time was draw some lines with a marker." It was a roll of the dice with the pregnancy test, as Jenna or her mother would likely have spotted the fakery right off the bat, but I was hoping that her father would see it first and not notice the difference. It was a shot in the dark, but it seems to have worked out. Ralph settled into the guest room, and we became roommates as he adjusted to civilian life and me to a single life with the divorce in process. When Jenna got her new boy toy, she no longer felt the need to conceal it. Tim was a guy she worked with at the time. At her work functions, I had the opportunity to meet him on a few occasions, but I did not really know him. While I was on my way to get a cup of coffee in the downtown area, I came across a flyer a short while later. I removed it from the corkboard and placed it in my pocket so that I could take it with me after I left. On that particular evening, as I walked through the door, I gave Ralph back something that was obviously his work. He smiled and said, "Cute," referring to his work. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said as he looked over the flyer. "I have no idea what to believe." Specifically, it demonstrated Jenna and her new love, Tim, in a precarious position. Despite the fact that all of the inappropriate parts had been covered up, it was still obvious what they were doing. There was a statement that he was not her husband, and it included both of their names. That made it significantly more damaging when it actually occurred. The office served as the focal point of the distribution, which then eventually spread outward from there. When I asked Ralph, "How many did you put out?" he responded, "A few thousand." I then asked, "How did you find the time to put them all up?" Ralph said, "Easy. I found a bunch of teenagers hanging out and gave them $20 each to put them up everywhere. Even if some of them ended up in the trash, they still got to cause trouble, and isn't that what being a teenager is all about?" I then hit play on the house phone messaging service, and Jen's ranting was audible to everyone. By the time she said, "Everyone at work thinks I'm a slut," it was pretty easy to follow her tirade this time, and the reason for this was that I simply did not care anymore. However, when she referred to him as a homeless guy with a sign, I looked at Ralph with a curious expression. Ralph handed me a beer, then showed me a video on his phone of a guy who looked homeless twirling a sign that said, "A cheating slut lives here." Ralph took a sip of his beer. "One isn't homeless, he's a new friend of mine from the VFW, and his wife left him while he was in Afghanistan. He was pretty happy to embarrass a cheating slut, even if it wasn't his own." I sipped my beer as we watched the video of Juan spinning his sign with gleeful enthusiasm. Through the course of the system, the divorce continued to move forward. My attorney was contacted by Jen's attorney about putting an end to the harassment. If Jenna was going to slander me, then we would change the reasons for the divorce to adultery, according to my attorney, who stated that I had no idea what she was talking about. I would have changed the reason from irreconcilable differences to something else, but I just wanted it to be over with, and I would not have been able to negotiate better terms from them. Nevertheless, the threat was successful, and she retreated. The following ranting message, which was sent a few days later, was something along the lines of "Fucking cowbell, fucking Game of Thrones High Sparrow shame." Part of the fun had become figuring out what he had done based on her ridiculous behavior. This time around, it appeared to be fairly obvious. As is his custom, Ralph began the video by handing me a beer and then began the video. Maria, Juan's girlfriend, was the one who had the opportunity to learn about what was going on. The fact that Maria's ex-husband abandoned her while she was carrying their child is something that she is still very upset about. As a form of self-care, she made a request for various ways in which she could assist others. The video was absolutely amazing. As she rang her bell, Maria's voice was so loud that it filled the entire room. Ricardo Montalban, who was playing the role of the High Sparrow, appeared to be Juan, dressed in his homeless garb. He looked without any judgment. Juan appeared to be embarrassed. Tim appeared to be wishing he were somewhere else rather than there. I took a sip and asked, "Where did this happen?" Ralph laughed and said, "Fucking Red Lobster." I then took another sip and asked, "So no one got naked?" Ralph slammed his hand down on the table and said, "Fuck, I knew I forgot something. I guess we'll have to go see some naked titties to make up for it." I said, "Your logic is impeccably sound, my friend. Let's go," and we went out to the local gentleman's club to remove the stain on Ralph's honor that was caused by his nudity mistake. Afterwards, we went to the club. "When will it end?" I asked him as we watched the dancers. "When the divorce is final, I'll let it go then." Until then, fuck her, the stunning dancer with the shockingly original name of Ebony said to Ralph as we placed our cash in her thong. It was then that she smiled at Ralph. Ralph is adamant that there is sexual activity in the champagne room, despite the fact that some individuals have asserted that there is no such thing. At least, this was the case until the two extremely large bouncers made it abundantly clear that Ralph would not be permitted to return to the club for a period of 1 month following the incident in which he and Ebony were caught engaging in sexual activity. As we were leaving the club, Ralph gave a sincere response, saying, "I think I'm in love." I have no idea how he managed to get into her car, but the fact that he was raving about fucking mothballs threw me for a loop. I racked my brain a great deal until I was forced to finally give up with a jubilant and dishonest smile on my face. He made the following statement: "Did you know that red bell peppers can end up smelling like mothballs if they sit for a long enough period of time? The internet is an amazing place." I responded, "I agree, my friend," as I finish my beer. You seem to have let Tim off rather lightly so far. Not doubting your brilliance, just stating an observation. Maybe I have, but he's had to change his cell phone 3 times this month. It seems that he's the most eligible man on Grindry, Scruff, Jacked, Hornet, and FarmersOnly.com, FarmersOnly.com. Farmers only don't discriminate, gay farmers need love too. I handed him another glass of beer and said, "They do, my friend. May they find the love that they seek among the wheat." That was followed by a visit from Ralph's uncle, who is the sheriff, to the house a week after that. Because I had always had a good relationship with his family, I decided to invite him into the house and get him a beer that I had brought with me. The sheriff took his first sip of the beverage and then asked, "Where is my idiot nephew today?" He took off with his new girlfriend to Mexico for the week last Friday. Interesting. So he isn't local? No, sir, he's been gone for days. What's up? The phone started ringing at that very moment. To my surprise, the sheriff turned his attention to me and asked, "Are you going to get that?" I responded, "Nope, I'm just trying to save the evidence of my insane ex-girlfriend's mental instability." This was the beginning of the ranting show of a message. "Fucking lawn work, brown grass, cheating whore," I said after taking another swallow. "I'm guessing my wife's work has some issues with their grass." The sheriff responded, "It does seem to be the case." They swore that it was Ralph, but it seems like he has a good alibi. Why don't you call him, and we can confirm where he is and get this settled now? I gave Ralph a ring, and a recognizable voice picked up his phone. "Hi, Ralph's busy right now. Can I help you?" The moans that followed, "Oh baby, right there, so good," gave a good indication of what Ralph was up to at the moment. The sheriff took it and asked, "Where is Ralph right now, honey?" I responded, "Oh fuck, he's inside of me right now," and I couldn't help but spout my beer across the room. The sheriff couldn't help himself either, laughing. He asked, "Honey, are you two in Mexico or here in town?" Ralph had taken the phone from her, though we could still hear the sound of skin-on-skin contact. "We're in Cancun, Uncle Sly, just enjoying the local sights. I'll email you my flight itinerary in a little bit." I'm sure whatever it was, probably a bunch of punk teenagers. "I've got to let you go, I'm kind of busy right now, bye." The sheriff handed me back my phone, finished his beer, and walked out laughing to himself as he mumbled. It was now time for the divorce to come to an end date. The most important thing for Jenna was that this marked the end of Ralph's games, and more importantly, I was a free man. On a Sunday that was absolutely beautiful, we were just getting ready to take in the first game of the afternoon sports season. As I sat down on the couch, I handed Ralph a beer. "Thanks, buddy, I appreciate you helping out. It's time for everyone to move on." "Not quite yet, one more to go. We've got to end on a high note. Can you end with something better than you've already done?" Putting his hand against his heart as if offended by the notion, "My good sir, you wound me with your lack of faith." That didn't scare me, it was the evil grin that sent a shiver down my spine. He looked at his watch and said, "You'll see." Just about. It was incredible, just like anything you would see in a movie. "How bad is this going to be?" That very instant, the phone began to ring. Now, there were some parts of the screaming that were clear, such as "You fucking bitch." Other parts of the screaming were just bits of words like church, grandmother, fucking Elvis, strap-on, threesome, and whole congregation. I looked at Ralph and asked, "What the fuck did you do?" He simply smiled and asked, "Want to watch?" as he opened up a video on his iPad. Upon entering, I immediately recognized the church that Jenna and I had been married in. It was obvious that it was the same place. The minister was in the middle of his sermon when all of a sudden a man approached him. It was obvious that the minister was perplexed for a brief period of time. However, the individual stated that he needed to confess his sins and then stood on the altar. It was then that he started to declare that he had committed a sin in the eyes of the Lord and that he desired to make amends for his wicked actions. Jenna, a member of the congregation, was the woman he had been having sexual relations with, and he expressed his desire to repent of his sins. Currently, I am attempting to make sense of this situation as I watch a dwarf who is 4 feet tall and dressed as Elvis declare that he has been fucking my ex-wife. It then became even more peculiar. Observing the video with or as Elvis walks over to Jenna, grabs her hand, and then abruptly begins talking about how much he enjoyed it when Jenna used the strap on him and pegged him while Love Me Tender was playing in the background. He would do anything for Jenna's love, even though he didn't particularly enjoy it when Tim made him dress up as Tinkerbell one time. However, given that her divorce was finalized, it was finally possible for them to be together. After that, he got down on his knees and went ahead and made his proposal to her. When he held the ring in his small hands, it appeared to be enormous. "Be my full-sized Priscilla, Jenna. I love you." Jenna was in a state of disbelief. The situation was a complete and utter chaos. Her grandmother passed out, her father stood up and threw up, Tim ran for the door, and her mother was crying. I was completely taken aback. While I was staring at him, I was completely at a loss for words. As he sat back and smiled, he did nothing. Someone entered the kitchen 1 minute after the front door had been opened and the door had been opened. I heard the refrigerator open, and a few seconds later, there was a 4-foot Elvis impersonator sitting next to me on the couch, watching the game. He was watching the game. While he was looking at me, he gave me a wink and then he said, "Hail to the king, baby." He then cracked open a beer. When it came to my own vengeance, I decided to take a much more civilized approach to exacting my penalty. For the past year, I have been in a relationship with Kara, who was Jenna's former best friend. It turned out that Jenna had done a pretty good job of keeping it a secret from her friends. As a result of the fact that Kara's ex-husband had been caught the previous year engaging in sexual activity with a woman who was 30 years his senior, Jenna was aware that she could not reveal her secret to Kara. There is a certain level of satisfaction that comes from listening to your ex-girlfriend cry when she tells you that she is unable to go out because she is going to spend the night at her boyfriend's house. In the event that she found out that Kara's new best friend, Ebony, was going to be there with her boyfriend, Ralph, she would most likely be even more enraged than she already was. Ebony extended an invitation to Kara to attend her day job as a Foxy fitness instructor, and each and every time I have the opportunity, I compliment Ebony on the excellent instruction that she provides. Following the presentation that Kara gave to me about what she had learned in class on that particular day, Ralph plans to make a proposal to Ebony later tonight when they return to her residence. In the same way, I will also be proposing to Kara tonight. Ralph just so happens to know the ideal dwarf who would be able to hand-deliver a wedding invitation to Jenna, and I have every intention of having it delivered to her during the wedding ceremony. Dear listener, until we meet again, if you have made it this far, I would appreciate it if you would click the button that says subscribe. This will be of great assistance.